Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Death of Death, where we proclaim Christ's victory over sin, death, and everything else. I'm your host, Nick Stewart. Hope you all had a wonderful Easter weekend. I'm going to California this week, so I had to have next week's episode ready as well as this one. So I thought I would take this opportunity to give you guys a little taste of the Elect Exclusive Edition. That's the exclusive podcast I do once a month over on Patreon. I've been going through Christopher Hitchens' book on atheism, God is Not Great. And this month I was joined by a patron and a very good friend of mine, Brian Seitz. He and I talked about chapters 3 and 4. It's got pigs. It's got circumcision. It's got man-bear pig, in fact. And, you're going to have to listen to know more. I figured this would be a great episode to share with you all and show you what you're missing by not being a member of the elect. If you want to sign up, just go over to patreon.com/deathofdeath, and it's just $4 a month. I like to say that's less than a good cup of coffee, so remember that every time you buy coffee. Patrons also get the free show 3 days early, and you get a 20% discount on merchandise if you message me on there and ask for a code. So if those aren't enough reasons to sign up, I just don't know what you want from me. I can't do any more. I recorded this episode through my headphones, and I had a little trouble with some spikes in the audio. Compressed them and, tinkered with them and stuff, and it won't sound super loud to you or startle you, but it did have some distortion on my voice every once in a while. So if that's unpleasant sounding to you, I apologize, but it does only happen a few times, so it should be all right. I just wanted you guys to know that I also know that there was a problem with the audio, that it was not mere incompetence that let that fly by my attention. So I think that's all I've got to say leading into this episode. So let's turn it over now for some great fun. Thanks for listening, everybody. Or what we could do is pretend to say hi to each other for the first time just now.
You got it.
Brian Seitz, oh my gosh. It's good to see you. Wow, your beard looks amazing.
Nick! Oh, I've missed you so much.
Man.
I like the cheetah mug too. What's going on with that? Grr. Man, a couple of things there. One, you asked me to read a book with you, and I was honored to be a part of any part of that. And then you asked me to read chapter 3. So when I read chapter 3, it was one of the shortest chapters in the book, which I thought maybe was the commentary on my intellect. But then the other part about chapter 3 that I really found enjoyable was all about pigs, and being a former police officer, I thought, wow, this is a double whammy. And so now that you bring up you've got this mug and you've had it since you were 10, Nick, I don't think I've had anything since I was 10. And so is this an ageism type thing too? Are you hitting me on all three sides?
No. See, I'm a hoarder. And I didn't realize that till I got married, but pretty severe one. I should say for both of those other things you brought up, I did not look ahead. I've never read this book before. I started this book once and then got distracted with The End of Faith by Sam Harris, so I never finished this one. But I realized when I wanted to start reading it, I should do all this for the podcast. So the next chapter was chapter 3. I had no idea what it was. And I hit you and Nick Quint up to do some episodes on this book. And you got back to me and we're ready to do chapter 3. So I just decided, okay, whatever it is, we'll do it. And I still didn't read it until just a few days ago. So
shortest chapter of the book, all about pigs. Thanks, Nick.
Oh man!
All right, as believers, we're all about grace and redemption and charity. So we're going to go ahead and implement those right now as we speak.
Okay. Well, you know what? I never would have made the comparison. that was all you. So No, I appreciate you doing the show, and we've actually talked about Christopher Hitchens before, but I don't know if either of us have ever engaged with his actual literature before. So
Right.
I know that he's a great untapped resource and a very interesting atheist in general.
Yeah. So I'm weird. And well, my wife
We
would,
all are.
yeah, my wife would agree with that. But so I have like weird hobbies, and one of them is I get engaged with certain viewpoints that are opposite of mine.
Uh-huh.
So back in the day, I used to love to read Christopher Hitchens. I can't say I read his books, but he used to write for, I want to say, The New Yorker. He would write for a lot of publications. And if I saw his name, I would almost always read it. Mm-hmm. I used to read Camille Paglia all the time. I love to read her. She's like the opposite of who I am. But Chris Poletti said to me a while ago, it's less important to me on some of the beliefs you hold as long as you can explain the reason you have those beliefs. And Camille is one of those persons that can explain those beliefs. And so I used to read her all the time. She's kind of disappeared. Like Andrew Sullivan is another one. If you're familiar with him.
Not at all.
So he's current. I would highly encourage you to read him. I think you would find him fascinating.
Andrew Sullivan.
It used to be called Sully's Dish. He has a newsletter that he publishes all the time. And so he is a gay Catholic man who takes his faith very seriously. And also his sexuality very seriously. And watching him work through those things is interesting. Again, not a person I tend to agree with on a lot of things. Like Glenn Greenwald, he's another guy that in my mind has got an intellectual curiosity and a morality that attracts me. Yeah. So Christopher Hitchens, that's a long-winded way of saying I'm very familiar with Christopher Hitchens, although I can't recall ever reading a full tome.
Yeah. Likewise, I've seen Collision at least twice. I don't know if you know that movie.
I do. I watched it. I heard you mention it on a podcast. Knowing that this was going to come up, I sought it out and watched it.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah. For anyone listening who doesn't know, that is a movie that was about Christopher Hitchens and Doug Wilson, a Christian and an atheist, doing like a speaking tour. I don't know if there was a book behind it, but it was like a speaking tour where they debated atheism. I think specifically whether Christianity has been good for the world, I think was what they were really talking about. But it's a very good movie.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. And it's like you had mentioned, and so I'll get slightly controversial. And since this is your show, I anticipate a rebuke. And maybe the screen will go dark. But I was not overly excited about some of Wilson's arguments on stage, although I thought his arguments in the backseat of the limo were wonderful.
Really? Okay.
And I would say the same thing about Hitchens too. And so that led me many, many years ago when my daughter was going to Biola. She invited me to attend the Hitchens versus William Lane Craig debate because she knew I was a fan of both people. Uh-huh. And my memory is faulty, so I might have got this wrong, but I believe I had tickets. I believe there was a strong desire to go, and I got sick. So I ended up watching that debate way back then, and I watched it again after the Douglas Wilson one. And for my money, our favorite Molinist, because William Lane Craig is a Molinist, our favorite Molinist wiped the floor with Hitchens.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to watch that.
He did it so kindly and lovingly, and really what you would want somebody who is practicing the way of Jesus to do it. And William Lane Craig, he definitely kind of went for the jugular, but he did it with a smile and then offered a Band-Aid afterwards.
Now I see.
which I thought was beautiful, because some other of the debates were less charitable. One of my favorites, and the way I got sincerely exposed to Hitchens was through Larry Taunton. And so I haven't seen Larry Taunton's name in the news in many, many years, but he is an evangelical. He had a ministry, and since we're FaceTiming on my computer, I can't Google anything right now. So I'm crippled here. But Larry Taunton wrote 2 books featuring Christopher Hitchens.
Okay.
And
he wrote The Faith of Christopher Hitchens, didn't he? Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so I thought both of those books were really beautiful and compelling, and honestly gave me hope for Hitchens.
Yeah. Yeah, he tells the story about doing Bible study with Christopher Hitchens in the park. And
Right.
Christopher Hitchens brought scotch to the park to drink,
Yes.
some Black Label to drink while they were doing Bible study. Or
Yeah.
mutual textual criticism is what he wanted to call it.
Yes. Well, and you know from knowing me fairly well that I can never remember the names of books. It's just like something. So Taunton wrote one book. He and his wife adopted a girl, if I remember right, from Russia, or from the Ukraine actually, and they intentionally adopted her knowing that she had rickets and AIDS. And he and Hitchens had recently met on the debate circuit, and Hitchens could not understand why it is that you would do this. You know this child has got, these horrendous diseases. You know this child's chances of thriving are slim to none. Why would you do this? And so that was one of the ways that Larry exposed Hitchens to the doctrines of grace and of love and just sacrifice. And then the book that you mentioned, he and Hitchens actually did a road trip where they drove around a good part of the country just basically talking about God or lack of God when it was Hitchens. And one of my favorite parts is when they load up for the trip, Hitchens has a clothing bag, but he also basically brought an entire case of Johnny Walker because that was his scotch. And Hitchens would want to drive around and pour himself a drink, as he would say. So,
Oh my gosh.
yep.
Man, what an interesting guy. He I've heard that he actually was pro-life by the end of his life. I haven't searched to see if that's true, but it would explain well having interactions with people like that. That would kind of explain how he's evolved some of his views on that.
As a fallible being, I reserve the right to be wrong in much of what I think and say. But if memory serves, do you know the story of how Hitchens came to be a United States citizen?
No.
So he became a United States citizen in direct response to 9/11.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he was so upset and compelled by what he saw as the duplicitousness of faith, and he was frustrated with the police actions before, and when the United States stood up and was attacked, after being attacked, they stood up. He was compelled to come to the U.S. and be a part of that system.
Wow.
Interesting.
I did not know that. Did not know that.
That's fun facts for 1,000, Alex.
So, just for the most basic intro, I want to ask what you thought about these chapters, just kind of on the surface, and then I also, I think first we should probably mention why should two Christians get together and talk about a book about atheism?
Sure. So you want me to go first on what I thought about them?
Let's start with why we would do this.
So I think I mentioned it or alluded to it earlier with Camille Paglia and Andrew Sullivan and some others. Joan Didion is another one, with brilliant intellectual minds that I disagree with. And my desire, and there's not enough time in the day, but my desire is to understand to the best of my abilities why they think so differently than I, in case I've missed something.
Okay.
And so in that type of thing, I feel like I'm a fairly committed follower of Jesus. I don't always wear that comfortably, but I desire to. And I'm fascinated less by people who are, the new lexicon, the new language of today is tribal. I'm fascinated less by people in my tribe and more by people who I think are brilliant that refuse to be a part of my tribe. And, I learn a ton of stuff from Christopher Hitchens. I learn a ton of stuff from people who think very, very differently from me. And sometimes what I learn strengthens my faith, and sometimes it actually challenges it. So it makes me dig deeper and be more rigorous in, the defense of my faith, an apologetics aspect, although I don't like to go around arguing with people, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, totally. I think most atheist arguments kind of repeat themselves, and I do come across them sometimes where it's like, wow, I've never really heard that angle of it, but then once you've heard it, you've heard it. So every bit of atheism you can get your hands on will equip you in the future to kind of deal with some of those arguments.
Yeah, when I was a newer believer, I would intentionally seek them out. YouTube was a new thing. Mm-hmm. So I would watch as many debates as I could. I would read, sites like Greg Kuchel's sites, all kinds of stuff. Him. Yeah, just trying to understand, William. That's how one of the ways I found William Lane Craig. And now when I read William Lane Craig, oftentimes he's over my head. He's a not an easy read sometimes, but very compelling. And the atheists, like, did you ever see the movie Expelled?
Yeah.
So Dawkins is interviewed as part of that movie, and it's a Ben Stein production, and it basically is talking about cancel culture before anybody knew what those terms were.
Yeah.
That movie's probably 15 years old, if not older.
Pretty sure it came out in 2008. Yeah.
Did it really?
That was definitely before cancel culture was like part of the vernacular.
Yeah. So we'll go 13 years then. So in that, he interviews Dawkins, and Dawkins is, again, another brilliant guy who's got lots of interesting reasons for his belief. But Ben Stein, rather than falling for all the straw men, and I think that's what this book is full of, is a bunch of straw men, Ben Stein just kept asking, well, so, okay, but how did life begin? Yeah, okay, I understand that, but how did life begin? Okay, I understand that. And ultimately, Dawkins proffered a theory that space sperm had been sent to this planet, and that we were essentially germinated by outer space beings. And honestly, I think one of the things that society does, and this is what I struggle with in our news feed nowadays, is it should be a little bit more court-like, where you get asked a question, you answer the question, you might clarify it, and then you move on. But we don't do that anymore. We keep beating and beating and beating and beating. Yeah. Where if we would just ask a question, if I said, Nick, what's your favorite color? And you say it's red, and I want you to say it's purple. What's the point in me? Okay, you said it's red. Now let's move on.
Yeah.
And instead, we're always trying to change each other's minds, where it should be okay to sit in similar spaces and think differently.
Yeah, definitely. I don't know if it was in Expelled or if it was a commentary on that movie, but they basically said Richard Dawkins' big argument against intelligent design is intelligent design by aliens.
Yes, absolutely.
Hilarious.
Which is a little bit what I found about Dawkins, and I've only read the first 4 chapters, so I'm not an expert on it. But specifically, chapter 3, he in one vein he argues that the notion of not eating pork is ridiculous because pork is good food, and so these antiquated people were idiots. And how dare they not eat pork? And then a short time later, he says, well, but we do have to realize that pork pigs are probably the closest thing to man. The skin is the same, and this is the same. And I'm like,
and they're so intelligent.
Right. They're so intelligent. They squeal just like humans when trapped. And I thought to myself, okay, this isn't where I thought you were going to go with this.
Yeah.
But don't you think you've just kind of defeated your own argument?
I literally had that question written down for you. Like, do you think that he defeated his own argument at pretty much every turn? Yes. He even mentions how filthy they are. Right. Yeah. Well, it got me thinking a little more deeply on some areas that candidly I just haven't thought about much. And so I was going through the list of what was going on and why those things were. And, I know that pigs have trichinosis. I don't know that trichinosis was a thing back in antiquity, in Old Testament days. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. Somebody else probably does. I did some research on that for the episode, so we'll get into that shortly.
Okay. Because there's another animal that carries trichinosis that I would assume would have been okay for the Israelites to eat, that is mentioned in the Bible, but I don't know. And maybe you'll know the answer to that too. Bears make a couple of pretty important appearances in the old Bible. Like, I know, is a man devoid of hair on top of your head. I think there's a story about an old bald guy who sicks a couple of bears on a bunch of kids.
I just read that yesterday. That's so insane. That just happened to be in my Bible plan yesterday. Yeah.
But we're going to call that providence, Nick.
Yes,
we're just going to go
with it. Is. Yeah, absolutely. But bears are like the number one source of trichinosis.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess he definitely kind of undercut his own point by starting off talking about the filthy and almost immoral nature of pigs, because he even mentions how they eat their own kids sometimes, and they
Right.
eat feces and stuff. So we kind of already covered that, like, didn't really make a whole lot of internal sense with calling people idiots for not eating them.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. And then talks about how intelligent they are and how awesome, and then ends it by saying that he had some of the best pork of his life in Spain.
Yeah.
So he kind of just bookends it with, we should eat them, and then in the middle kind of gets sympathetic toward them. But I think it almost shows just like what a varied thinker he really is, because he is able to see these different points of view and kind of hold them in tension. It just doesn't do a whole lot for his argument, you know?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I would say varied thinker is a very charitable way of saying it. I would almost say inconsistent.
Yeah, well, definitely.
For a guy who's as brilliant as Hitchens
Yeah,
is, I would have expected him to work through that a little better,
yeah,
especially when you're writing it down in a book.
yeah. Yeah, he's definitely, I mean, every atheist is very inconsistent, unless, I guess, unless they kill themselves or unless they're complete nihilists. Even, I mean, like, technically, that's where it all should go. So
Right.
I think any atheist is inconsistent, but we're definitely reading the absolute best of that inconsistency in Hitchens. I think he definitely beats out Dawkins and Harris. He's definitely my favorite atheist. I don't know if he's yours.
Oh, for sure.
Yes.
Because, well, one, I think it's the accent,
Oh yeah.
right? And I mean, he's like, if Will Ferrell got up on the wrong side of the bed every day, that's Christopher Hitchens in my mind. He's got that witty, sarcastic,
Yeah.
just a cynical guy, but he does it with like a twinkle in his eye and a smile in the corner of his mouth. And there's
Yeah.
something about me, at least, that really enjoys that. And maybe
Yeah.
that's a bad part of me, but I think Will Ferrell's funny. I do. I
Yeah.
laugh out loud. I think Christopher Hitchens is funny. I laugh out loud.
Yeah, definitely. He definitely speaks to that part of me that I don't know, man. I don't know how I've avoided physical altercations all my life, because I say some pretty gnarly stuff to people, but I just I got a look in my eyes, I guess, that shows them that I really care, and I get away with it.
Yeah, well, maybe it's like you're 6'3" and you look like Bill the Butcher from Gangs of New York. So, that helps.
That is for sure the greatest compliment I've ever received in my whole life. Yeah. Are you excited or more like hesitant for the possibility of a Pigman clone that we might see in the
Ooh.
future?
Well, I think we can all relate everything back to The Simpsons,
Oh,
and they
okay.
did have Bear Man Pig.
Oh, that was South Park.
Oh, was it South?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
thank you.
Man, Bear,
Yeah,
Pig.
yeah. Man Bear Pig, thank you.
Man, Bear, Pig. Yeah.
Well, it sounds like you have questions, so if you want, we can just sort of stick to the questions, and then.
You know what? I do, just to kind of keep us on track, but if it goes somewhere else, like Man, Bear,
Okay.
Pig, I'm certainly not opposed to kind of going wherever it goes. So
How could you be?
you're right. Before we move on, is there anything from the first two chapters that you really thought was worth noting, or anything that like really jumped out at you?
Yeah, I did take some notes in my phone here, and there really wasn't a lot there. I felt like those chapters were almost warm-ups.
Yeah,
Um,
semi-autobiographical.
yeah, I have my notes. I have page 5, so let me look at page 5 here. Well, it says more than that.
Oh, okay.
Um,
But I do that. I'll make a note of like page 6 of this thing, and then it's like, well, now I got to go look. Why didn't I just write down what it was?
yeah, so I have a quote from the book, and it's our belief is not a belief. Our principles are not a faith. We do not rely solely upon science and reason because these are necessary rather than sufficient factors, but we distrust anything that contradicts science or outrages reason. And yeah, I thought that was an interesting quote. Obviously, it was interesting enough for me to type it into my phone with my ginormous thumbs. Um, it's just such a, you use the word nihilist. It's just such a, I don't know.
Yeah,
It makes me sad.
yeah. Well, I think that really shows his inconsistency and where presuppositional apologetics really nails it, because that is a belief he just
Yeah.
described. Do you believe that you don't believe anything and that you only believe science and anything that contradicts science? And I know I
Right.
said this on the episode where I covered that chapter, but it's worth repeating here. Science has changed a lot. Things that were scientific opinion 200 years ago are witchcraft now, like,
Oh, yeah.
so like you are putting your absolute faith in this thing that changes all the time. And
Yeah.
and we've got the same Bible for 2000 plus years.
I have three adult kids and they have spouses and they're all amazing adults. And I don't recall ever intentionally bleeding any of them because that was science 200 years ago, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
There's the belief. I think it was George Washington probably died from being bled too much.
Really?
Yeah, I think it's Washington again. I reserve the right to be wrong in all facts I throw out there.
Sure.
But yeah, sure.
There ain't no fact checkers on this show.
Well, what was it? The last administration, something about facts and then
Alternative facts.
alternative. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. So
That was the day of the inauguration. So it was. I think it was regarding how many people were at the inauguration, and someone
Yeah.
called the spokesperson. What would you call that? Like the public relations person for Trump's campaign, who was promptly fired. I think.
Yes.
And they called her on it, and she was like, "Well, you can't blame people for presenting alternative facts."
Alternative facts.
Hilarious.
So yeah, that's a quote from Hitchens. He says the sentence above it says, and here's the point about myself and my co-thinkers, and then he launches into that. And basically, if it's not current science, then it's out.
Yeah.
And as you pointed out, one of those old apologetics tricks is, how much knowledge do you think exists in the cosmos? Right?
Yeah.
If you could draw, let's not do it to scale, obviously, but let's take this piece of paper. How much of this piece of paper represents knowledge? Okay. And how much of that knowledge do you personally have? And maybe somebody who's got a tiny bit of humility will put a dot. Mm-hmm. Okay. So all of this stuff exists outside this dot, yet you're 100% convinced that you have enough knowledge to make potentially the most important decision forever.
Yeah.
And I felt like Hitchens fell into that trap.
Yeah. And if there is one thing outside of that dot that wouldn't even necessarily contradict the dot, but just change or alter the way you interpret that dot,
right,
everything you believe is wrong.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. That's a numbers game that I'm not willing to play.
Yeah. Well, it's funny that, the Bible gets tagged a lot with being a flat earth document. Yeah. And I think there are arguments to be had in there, the four corners, of the world held up. But I also think that it talks about a view from space where it's a round orb floating in the sky.
I think it's Isaiah 40, the circle of the earth.
And so there's these tensions here. And can you imagine, and so when I see people going after extremes, even if I'm in not necessarily that extreme camp, but I'm in that way of thinking. Mm-hmm. Can you imagine what it was like to have been a true flat earther and discover that the world was round, right? I mean, we still have people who think that we didn't land on the moon. We still have people that think, in some capacity that we live on a flat earth. I just don't understand that. And I don't think they should be publicly mocked.
I don't know.
I don't think that falls in the way of Jesus, Nick. But I do think that and so I say publicly, but I do think that that's a conversation that should be had.
Yeah.
And if one of my friends was a sincere flat earther, I wouldn't, tag him in a public way so everybody could say, hey, look at this crazy flat earther.
Oh, you're right.
But if he and I were in the backyard having a conversation, I would say, dude, I love you so much. I have to challenge you on this. And I hope your skin is thick enough to take it and challenge me back. Tell me I'm wrong. And maybe that's why I'm drawn to the Hitchens type characters.
Yeah. Yeah. Who definitely.
Chapter 4, when we get to that, that was painful. It was painful to read. And he's not wrong.
Yeah.
Now, I can tell you that in my mind, it's only part of the story.
Yeah.
But he's not wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I was going to ask you later, but I mean, it's definitely worth asking now. Do you think that the behavior of certain Christians or certain groups of Christians reflect the truthfulness of the Bible at all?
Yeah. I mean, I think that there's a lot of beautiful people out there. I think there's a lot of people who are doing their best to be that reflection. I just think there's a lot of people. It's that old trope on, why would I expect somebody to follow a book they haven't read and to emulate a God they actually don't know, yet call themselves Christians? Why would I expect them to act properly? Yeah. And so, I mean, in our daily walk, it's an interesting conversation when you get the opportunity. So when was the last time you read the Bible cover to cover? There aren't a lot of people that can say they have. And it's a really difficult book. I would love to tell you that I just get it. Oh, yeah, totally. It's just not true. Yeah. I talk to people like you. I read commentaries. I listen to other podcasts. I'm always trying to help understand different things. And one of my favorite images for the Bible is a Tim Mackey image, or at least that's the first place I heard it. And he's one of the head guys for the Bible Project.
Love the Bible Project.
Yeah, I do too. And he says, when you open your Bible, look at it, look at the print as if it was modern. And if it were modern, you would see almost every other word, if not every word, blue, because it would be a hypertext, like you're looking at on your computer. And when you clicked on that, it would take you so many other places in the Bible that would make your head spin. Yeah. And so his point is, you can't just read, I'm going through Deuteronomy right now. That's a rough book. But you can't just read it and take that entirely at its face and say, well, that's all there is to Deuteronomy. Oh, no. It's setting up so much for the future. It's commenting so much on the past. It's also commenting on a lifestyle and a time that you and I have very little knowledge of. I mean, we live in the Western U.S., and we're a very individualistic, capitalistic society. And the Bible is none of those things. The Bible is an honor-shame culture. They're more of the beehive than, take your solitary animal, whatever that might be. They're more of the collective. It's about what's the good for the whole rather than focusing on the individual. And when we make everything about the individual, some of the archaic good for the whole looks crazy to us. Back to chapter 3 with cleanliness laws and what to eat and what not to eat. But if you're looking at the good of the organism, maybe it makes a ton of great sense. Yeah. And I feel like Hitchens, who talks about hermeneutics and exegesis, I feel like he gave that short shrift. I feel like, I don't know who was advising him in his learning process on this, but I feel like he didn't talk to the right guy. I feel like if he would have talked to a Tim Mackey, if he would have really sat down and studied under some of those people, maybe he would have seen things in a much different light.
Yeah.
Which definitely is not to place the pressure on Tim Mackey, because I don't think it's our job to bring anybody to the Lord. It's our job or our place to expose them, and it's the Holy Spirit's job to convict them.
Absolutely. He has so much to say about like how Christians have acted throughout history and like some of the atrocities that have been done in the name of Christ. But then he kind of makes this conclusion that because they've acted so wickedly, the things they believe cannot be true. And I just find that to be a really lame answer that you see everywhere. Because, I mean, that's the Crusades are the first argument against God that you get. And it's like, well, what does one actually have to do with the other? I get it, but it doesn't actually make any logical sense if you think about it,
Right. Well, and the Crusades were a response, albeit a defective and deficient one. It may have started off on the right foot and ended up horribly wrong. And I think maybe it's okay that we get beat up with the Crusades even into the 21st century. Yeah. But that chapter 4 was a really brutal read because he basically, for those who haven't read it, he points out atrocity after atrocity done in the name of faith. And his two biggest suspects, if you will, on the world stage are Muslims and Christians. And I think that's for a number of reasons. I mean, probably because we're the big boys on the block, so it's easier to find those things and point them out. But I would, if I could help Hitchens, I would say, find me a faith that doesn't have an atrocity behind it. Gandhi was no prince. We look at Gandhi and think he was just this wonderful, vegetarian sage, and he actually sidled up with the Nazis and did a lot of horrible things.
Yeah.
And so when Hitchens does that, though, I was thinking yesterday, trying to come up with an analogy in anticipation of our conversation. And so the analogy I came up with and why this chapter left me so flat, even though it was devastating, is imagine, I was trying to imagine what's the greatest charity? If I think of something that I look at and I think, man, that's just wonderful, and I would be willing to give them a lot of my money and a lot of my, time, treasure, and talent. And so the one that I came up with is the Make-A-Wish Foundation, right? I mean, there's a foundation that looks to be good. They take kids that are terminal and they give them their final wish. And I'm telling you, when I see those kids at Disneyland or pitching a ball off the mound at Dodger Stadium, I well up with tears. That gives me so much joy that somebody out there is doing that. Now, if you use the Google machine and you put in Make-A-Wish, Make-A-Wish Foundation scandals.
Oh no.
You'll be blown away at how many there are.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I mean, I figured things happen, but is it like a widespread problem?
No, I don't. And I'm not trying to talk bad about the organization. I'm actually still a huge fan. What I'm trying to say is I liken that to Christianity. The Make-A-Wish Foundation, I got to think that almost everybody that is a part of that is a part of it for the right reasons. Okay. There's a few people that go in for the wrong reasons, and those are our wolves in sheep's clothing, and there's structures and devices in place to hopefully weed those out. Occasionally somebody gets in there and, as Tim Keller calls it, the idol of the heart, one of the idols of the heart speaks to them, whether it's fame or money or something. And so you've had a number of scandals in the Make-A-Wish Foundation where somebody has stolen money. That's not a shocker, right? They take in millions of dollars. There was one scandal where one of the children, her mom actually later killed her. That's horrible. That's not necessarily a reflection of the Make-A-Wish Foundation, but we get put under an umbrella as Christian. Yeah. There's a lot of I actually recoiled when he used a vile term for Mother Teresa. So Christopher Hitchens did in that, and I was like, okay, I don't know that much about Mother Teresa, but there's not a lot of people I think of that have actually given their life in a more significant and heartrending way than Mother Teresa. And whatever her faith is in those moments, she's putting the other first. That's sacrificial beyond anything I've done or have been willing to do. And so it's hard for me to be down on a Mother Teresa-like figure, even though she's imperfect. Yeah. Christopher Hitchens demands perfection out of his religions, and there just isn't any.
Yeah. Well, really, on the hypocritical side of it, atheism tends to lead to statism.
Sure.
90% of the time, and I'm probably being generous with that, leads to a good, healthy statism. And I don't think any religion in world history has killed more people than statism.
Right.
because it encompasses so many other kinds of things.
Yeah, that's a great point, Nick. And I think one of the things that we're doing is we're starting to understand a better way to define religion. And in my way of defining religion, it makes communists religious zealots. Yeah. It makes the climate change people, many of them, not all of them, but it makes them religious zealots. Yeah. When it's like the Earth First people and the zero population growth people. They want to kill other people in order to preserve Earth. And Linda and I have recently been watching Infinity Wars, that whole series. The Avengers series.
Oh, the Avengers, yeah.
We've never seen it.
Yeah.
And so I just watched the second to the last one, and I don't remember which one it is. I think it's Infinity Wars. Anyway,
Yeah.
the guy with the big chin, the bad guy,
Yeah, Thanos.
Thanos. Thank you. He's a climate zealot.
Yeah.
That's all he is.
Exactly.
Right? And so that's a religion. He wants to be
Yeah.
God. And that's what these people want to do. They want to be God because they know what's best for your life.
Yeah.
And that's where the trouble starts. And that's where Christianity, in my mind, is so different. In that we've got somebody who's identified as God. And God says, I don't have any intention of forcing you into a belief or a practice or a faith. I want you to come willingly. I want that all should come, but you need to make the decision. And he allows that to happen. Where Islam or some other religions, if you're in their country and you're not practicing, you're either shunned at best, or at worst, you're actually physically harmed. Mm-hmm. And I don't know a true form of Christianity that believes that.
Yeah. Did you get a chance to read Thaddeus Williams' new book on social justice? Yeah, did you like it?
Loved it.
Yeah, he did a talk that was live streamed on Facebook, I think, probably a few other places, but promoting the book, and I watched it.
Yeah.
It was the only thing I got to experience because I'm all the way over here in Oklahoma now. But he listed all these atrocities, and he said, like, the Holocaust, apartheid, Rwanda. He just listed like 15, like a boggling number of these. Right. And he's like, can anyone tell me what the one thing these all had in common? And now the answer he was looking for was tribalism. But the answer that first came to my mind was those were all governments that did all those things.
Oh,
and
interesting.
So kind of bringing it back around. So my point is that, like, yeah, atheism tends to lead to a whole lot of atrocities that are almost incalculable. But not that it's the things that atheism leads to, not necessarily atheism in itself, you know. But
yeah.
But I've just always thought that's interesting. When
I like your perspective about governments too. That's interesting. Yeah. So I lost my train of thought too as I was talking, and where I was intending to lead when I first brought up the topic about communism is that if we define communism or atheism as a religion, which I do, atheism and communism have led to many more deaths, times a magnitude that we can't comprehend, many more deaths than your standard variety Muslim or Christian or Hindu or on and on and on.
Absolutely.
I mean, Pol Pot, Mao, Lenin, Stalin, tens of millions of people dead at the hands of atheists.
I think with those four dudes you just mentioned, we could be reaching almost 100 million dead.
Yeah. Oh, I
bet. Stalin was 20 million alone.
Yeah, I bet it's a lot more than that, but yeah.
Yeah. Just with the four you mentioned.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so many more.
Right.
Crazy. Well, on the topic of mass death, he does mention that pigs and human meat is supposed to taste similar. Have you ever tried this delicacy?
I did not know that. I'm not even sure I'm going to accept that as fact. I'm not quite sure what.
Well, he admits he doesn't know, so I don't know why he put that in the book.
I mean, if there is still some sort of tribe in some interesting place that is still eating flesh and they've got a comparison, I would be curious to see the blind taste test, like Coke and Pepsi in the old days. But I don't take much value in that.
You wouldn't try it?
No. And it's funny because, like, I'm an adventurous eater. I'll try just about anything. Yeah. But I'm pretty sure if hey, I've got some 14-year-old. Yeah, no, I'm not doing that. It's not going to happen. Yeah. Wrong. Evil.
Yeah. Well, how could I not ask that question? Because we were getting pretty heavy there with mass death and stuff. I had to find a way to lighten it without completely getting off the topic.
Yes, thank you for that.
I did do some research on trichinosis just because, so I did have a couple things I wanted to point out. He does say, another one of his kind of self-defeating points, he says that basically the reason why Israel was prohibited from eating pork, or people say the reason is because of things like trichinosis and the various parasites and germs and stuff that can be associated with pork meat. And he said that trichinosis can actually occur in all climates. I don't see how that defeats what he was saying about the climate of the
No.
ancient Middle East. But I think he actually did say that it wasn't a thing in the ancient Middle East, and I found in an article from the Smithsonian that it actually absolutely was, and that's probably one of the main reasons that that pork had
Right.
been prohibited, because it actually had culturally fallen out hundreds of years before God's law to Israel. The Egyptians actually already pretty much weren't eating it for those exact reasons.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Yeah, that's great. I didn't know
Yeah,
about trichinosis back then. There was an assumption there. I also make that assumption based on the different foods that the Israelites were not supposed to eat.
yeah,
And most of those foods, like the shellfish, they spoil really rapidly,
yeah,
and you get really sick,
yeah,
right? So there's a lot of things there
yeah,
that make me curious. The other thing I found interesting is, so the Israelites are, you know, they got an 11-day walk and it takes them 40 years. They're lost in the desert, right?
yeah.
So these are my people because they are vast underachievers. I come from a long line of underachievers. That's not true. My dad's amazing.
You are too, so I'm just gonna leave that leave that there. I was at your retirement party, and a lot of people had a lot of amazing things to say about your career. So
Yeah, it cost me a lot of money to get them to say those things, but thank you.
shut up.
But back to the pigs. One of the things I've found, so God has these people, and he basically takes the smallest tribe in the land, and he says, I'm going to make you my people as an example of what a people who follow me can do, right?
Yeah,
So he takes, it's like David is a good example. He's the smallest brother. He's a shepherd. He's a nothing. It's like, oh, you're a kid. Get out of here. And God rises him up. Well, he does the same thing with the Israelites. And one of the ways he does that is he sets them apart. And so God doesn't necessarily have to have reasons that you and I understand or agree with for all of these things. But one of the things I find fascinating is in Canaanite society, they used pigs for sacrificial animals. And God was calling the Israelites to use the other animals, because they were food, as sacrificial animals. And to use pigs, I think, would potentially have put them on a same level in a certain sense as the Canaanites, which we all know, not great people. Douglas Wilson said he would kill one if one jumped in front of him, which I thought was pretty inflammatory, but whatever. I
he
think there's a new
said
covenant.
in that historical moment when God told them to do that, then he would be fine with that.
Feels to me like there's a new covenant, Nick. I don't know. But so God wants to set these people apart in a number of different ways. And wouldn't it make sense to not eat the animal that your enemies eat and sacrifice on a daily basis?
Yeah, yeah,
So
definitely.
that's a reason that Hitchens never touched on.
Yeah, yeah, there were a lot of things that he never touched on. Yeah, one thing that I wanted to point out about the law in Israel is more of a question, really. Well, I guess one more thing would be that probably one reason pork tended to spoil more was because of the large quantity of it, and things like chickens get eaten faster. So I mean, there's all sorts of practical things he didn't really touch on as far as why it was prohibited, but basically, I was going to ask you that exact thing about Israel being set apart. Do you think it matters if these laws are arbitrary? Like, let's just say they are arbitrary. Like, God didn't really have any specific reason for prohibiting pigs. If the
Right.
purpose is to set Israel apart in their behavior, does it matter if there's a reason?
No, I
Yeah,
really don't think that it does. I think, like, I mean, we have a faith that in some lenses is crazy, right? I mean,
yeah,
we have a God who has no beginning and no end, where in many other areas we say everything has a beginning and an end. We have a God who doesn't degrade, and the fourth law of thermodynamics, which we all accept as true, is that everything is degrading, right? So we have all of these things that most people, it's no surprise to me when somebody looks at Christianity and hasn't done any study or thought, thinks we're nuts. I get it. And so when God gives us rules, it's easy to try and find a reason for all of them, because especially in this society, we need a reason for everything. And if there's a few in there that don't have a reason except it's a test, I'm okay with that. I look at the Old Testament, and this like there may be some robust debate here because maybe I'm wrong, but I look at the Old Testament, a lot of the Old Testament, as rudimentary fractions, meaning we're a people. Well, you don't take your 5-year-old and you don't teach your 5-year-old algebra. They can't handle it. You start off with addition, then you go to subtraction, then you go to fractions, and you progress them. And so the Israelites are starting off a little bit more advanced than, say, Noah and the kids, but we're in fractions. And so God is giving them a little bit of slightly complicated math to help them live not a perfect life, not a trouble-free life, but a better opportunity at a abundant life.
To reveal him to them.
Yeah, to reveal him. And so by the time Christ comes, now we're starting to hit algebra.
Yeah.
And so I think God, in a loving, condescending way, dumbed it down for these people and had to make it so simple that he gave them some of these rules that you and I was, again, in Deuteronomy today. Linda and I were reading some of the marriage customs and some of the, it sounds so patriarchal, would be our 21st century term. And in some of them, we can figure out there's really good reasons for some of these laws. And some, I just don't know the reason. And that doesn't mean one doesn't exist. It means I don't know it. But if we ever get to a point where we can know all reasons and know that this one doesn't have a reason, okay.
Yeah.
It's not like I never tested my own children when they were growing up with a rule that was maybe a little arbitrary, just to see if they would follow the rule.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there probably is a reason for everything, but I think it is worth pointing out that it's like the reason for the law was maybe not the most important thing behind it, but the fact that God was challenging them and setting them apart from other people. And so, it sounds good on its surface. It sounds good that like, oh, well, this Bible is just made up of all these crazy random things, but is it random? No, not really.
Yeah. Let's use my kitchen as an example, right? Mm-hmm. So we have a cupboard that is the snack cupboard. It has all the snacks, all the good stuff in it. And we have a cupboard on the other side of the kitchen that has got all the poisons and toxins in it. And we teach our kids not to go into the snack cupboard without permission, not to grab those things. And maybe I really don't care if they eat all the Oreos. Who cares, right? We'll run out of Oreos. There's no more. Okay, you ate them all. That's a lesson in itself. But I teach them not to go in the snack cupboard without my knowledge, not because I fear the snack cupboard, but because it's a cupboard and I fear the poison cupboard. Mm. And so I don't need to extrapolate that out for my 4-year-old. I just need them to follow my words and my wisdom, because I know ultimately if they'll go into this cupboard anytime they want, they'll find their way over to that cupboard, and that cupboard's dangerous. And I feel like God is setting up rules and laws to help us avoid a cupboard that we might even not know exists.
Yeah, that's a very, very good point. And earlier to your earlier analogy about math, I don't know if you did this intentionally, but you were pretty much paraphrasing what the London Baptist Confession says about the covenants, where it says that it was steps leading to the gospel. I don't want to butcher it. I'm going to pull it up here and read it. This covenant is revealed in the gospel, first of all to Adam in the promise of salvation by the seed of the woman, and afterwards by further steps until the full discovery thereof was completed in the New Testament. So, some views of the covenants is that these are kind of the exact same covenant, just with different signs and different, ways of doing things. Like circumcision is just an older version of baptism, but the London Baptist Confession paints it as this thing that's progressing toward something. It is actually being steadily more and more revealed.
Yeah. I did not intentionally do that. I did not know that. So thank you for that. That's good.
I liked that analogy a lot.
Cool.
Yeah.
You brought me to a place just now on something I did not know, and I definitely learned from Hitchens, assuming he's telling the truth, where he talks about that practice, and I'm looking through the book right now trying to find it, with the Jewish rabbis and the circumcision.
Yeah.
I did not know that that was a thing.
It's definitely not in the Bible. I mean, it's not explicitly
Yeah, and
said.
so that's okay. I was going to ask you, like, what do we do with that? Because I mean, you know my past. Yeah, I worked as a police officer forever. I worked as a detective for a long time, including child abuse and sexual crimes. And I'm telling you right now, that doesn't go over well with me.
No. No, not at all. Honestly, I was surprised how taken aback I was
Right.
by that statement, because he starts out by saying, "Suppose you caught me doing this." He didn't tell you what he was talking about first.
Right.
He says, "Suppose you caught me doing this," and like, honestly, that, I mean, you probably already know, that's not the edgiest thing I've ever heard in my life. So there was no transcendent reason why this should shock me so much, but it
Right.
just, the way it was presented and the way that
Yeah.
it came up, just, I mean, it took me 30 seconds probably to like get out of a stupor. I was just like shocked that he would say it that way.
Yeah. I mean, it's your
Yeah.
show. I don't know if you need to go into detail, but I just, for anybody that might be listening, I think we might get 3 listeners on this episode. Well, I do intend to tell my mom and dad.
I'll listen
So,
to it too, Brian.
so this is a sort of Hasidic fundamentalists who hope for the second temple to be rebuilt in Jerusalem. To them, the primitive rite of, and I won't be able to pronounce it, but I'll make it up, Peria Metzitza, is part of the original unbreakable covenant with God. And so basically it's a type of circumcision that involves obviously little boys and a rabbi's mouth. And it was shocking to me.
Yeah. Yeah. Not going to leave a good Yelp review for that rabbi. It
Yeah.
started off pretty normal. It started off as your normal brisk, but really took a strange turn there at the end. And
Right.
yeah, it's weird. I've never heard about that anywhere besides
No.
this book, and I don't know Christopher Hitchens to be the type that would just make something up entirely,
No.
or to, not even like a really well-sourced thing. Like,
Yeah.
even the wrong things he says are really well-sourced. You know what I
Right.
mean? Like in chapter 2, he talks about the virgin birth myths in all the different mythologies, and I talked about that on the last episode. But it's a very well sourced idea. It's just wrong.
Right.
So I didn't want to Google that. but,
Sure.
But
Yeah, no.
I am curious to see like how prevalent that really is or was.
Yeah, it sounds like it's pretty small. It sounds like it's a pretty small community, but it's a good idea not to Google it.
Yeah. Don't need to get flagged for that
Because
kind of thing.
all of our brothers and sisters that are worried about certain aspects of our government following them, if you Google that on your phone, you can guarantee the government's going to follow you.
Well, you know what? If they're going to be following people, those are the people I want them following.
Yeah, amen and amen.
So try to think about this chapter. I think this is the last question I've got about chapter 3. Try to think about this as an outsider who doesn't believe in the Bible. Do you find this compelling, what he's saying? Or would you still have some of the same logical problems with it?
Oh, chapter 3. Do I find that compelling? No. I mean, there's a part of me that does, but that's an incomplete part. Mm-hmm. And if I can challenge not you in particular, but your generation, because my kids are of your generation, one of the biggest failings I see is that we've gotten away from critical thinking. And so we have become a country where we read something and we just accept it for the most part as truth. We just accept it as truth when oftentimes there's another side to the story. And Christopher Hitchens, I think, is very guilty of that. He accepts or proffers certain things as truth when there's whole pieces of complexity that are missing. And chapter 3 in particular with the whole pig thing, I mean, I think you and I have discussed a few of those things that are potentially missing.
Yeah.
And then there's no charity in Hitchens. There is only, he's a hammer and everybody else is a nail. And it would be interesting, and I think that's where, Larry Taunton, which apparently was one of his best friends as Hitchens was dying, that's where Taunton is so instrumental, because it appears that at long last Hitchens finally found somebody who was contrary in belief, and he spent a significant amount of time with them. I wonder what the Hitchens family was like. He discusses it early in the book a bit, but his brother Peter is a pretty strong Christian.
Yeah.
And they've even debated publicly. And so part of me is like watching some of those old pundits, and a pundit named Schultz, who was on one of the left-wing channels, who was just rabid, like, neck inflamed, spittle coming out every time he would talk. And this predates Trump. Every time he talked about conservatism. The problem with that is before that show, he was a conservative. And so when I look at some of these people, I think that this is more capitalistic and taking advantage of an opportunity to make money than a true, sincere belief. And as I watch Hitchens in a number of his debates, I wonder how much he truly believed some of the things he was saying. Just like, a lot of the Christian people he debated. And what I'd really like to do is watch him debate a Muslim. I think that would be fascinating. I've never done it, and I don't know much about the Quran. I've only tried to read a little bit of it, and I didn't get anywhere. But I think it would be fascinating to see how he did that, because it almost comes across to me as a shtick rather than a core centrality of who he is. Where the good ones, the William Lane Craigs, and again, Molinist, I'm not a Molinist, but the William Lane Craigs, the Larry Tauntons, even the Douglas Wilsons, who I struggle with in some of his thinking as well, but it appears to me at least they sincerely believe it and are not willing to compromise their own integrity and say a lie. And if they get caught in something, they'll say, well, that's a really good point, or that's a good question.
I think at the end of Collision, there's a conversation in the back of the limo.
Yep. Yeah, he says something to the effect of he and I'll paraphrase horribly, but I think Hitchens believes he got the better of Wilson in almost everything, except there was one area that Wilson had brought up that he hadn't heard before that really left him puzzling. And I don't remember what that area was. But then Hitchens also admitted to his own skepticism of his dogmatic beliefs because he recognized there were holes in it.
So at least he's honest in some areas.
For sure. Yeah, well, that's what, and maybe I wasn't articulate. I feel like there's a stage persona and a back of the limo hanging out with your buddy persona.
Yeah.
And in the Wilson movie, I really enjoyed the back of the limo, or they were in pubs a lot.
Yeah.
I love that persona much more than the stage persona, because the stage persona, as far as Hitchens, to me, was less genuine.
Yeah. Well, moving into chapter 4, I didn't think we'd get so much mileage out of the pork chapter, or what I wanted to call the porkibitions.
Called it the pork apocalypse, but yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, like we said, he lists a lot of, tragedies and atrocities done in the name of religion. I think most of them probably Islamic, not really as much Christianity represented. He was talking about homosexuality, and he talked about how some people like to say that homosexuality is unnatural, but he points to, the fact that some animals actually do participate in that,
Sure.
and that a large number of people do as well. Does the mere presence of a behavior make it natural? Better stated, would probably be, well, I guess in the context of chapter 4, it would be if these behaviors are natural, which murder a lot of the times is a quite natural behavior. If a behavior is natural, does that mean that the Bible's not true? because it tells you not to engage in that behavior.
Yeah, that's a good example, because I think every culture, with very few exceptions, and there might be one or two exceptions of some tribe in Amazon, is abhorrent to murder. 99% of the world abhors child abuse, abhors infant sexuality. Those are universal things. And C.S. Lewis said, water. I am thirsty because water exists. And so we abhor things because we were created to abhor those things. And so we have an intrinsic human desire to be moral in the right ways. And the philosophy that Hitchens and Dawkins and Harris and all those guys, the philosophy that they cling to basically negates that moralistic view of the world and really reduces it down to there is no reason not to murder your neighbor. There is no reason to be sacrificial in any way. There is no reason not to rape. And I think, even people that don't have a faith can agree with that. They just don't understand why they agree with it.
Yeah. I mean, you could say for your own self-interest, there's a reason not to murder, but what's the reason to act in your own self-interest? Like there's no ultimate reason to do what benefits you more in the long run.
Yeah, it's all very circular.
Yeah. And another thing just about like the way people are acting in this world and some of the wrong things people believe or have done. He mentions germ theory, and he mentions how, we were completely in the dark about that for so long. But almost going right back into chapter 3 about pork, like God clearly knew about germ theory, and I don't believe Moses or any of the writers of the Bible did, because God obviously quarantined people very intentionally for certain things, and I don't think they ever knew why. Like on a cellular, molecular level, I don't think they understood germs.
No, clearly, but there's your math example again too. Is that they, the Bible is excellent in cleanliness. It's excellent in ritualistic behavior that is for human flourishing. And you may not always agree with it. And I'm guessing they didn't have, bars of lava hanging on a rope in their garage either. Yeah. But they had these purification rituals in order to keep them clean, to reduce the instance of harm and death, which I think is amazing. And that's another example. We may find out that some of those laws in, Leviticus and Deuteronomy, we may find out in 100 years that there's a perfectly good reason for some of the things that we think are abominable.
Yeah.
We're just not as smart as we think we are.
Yeah. Yeah. But, interesting that, the Bible has never changed and is kind of affirming things, and we're just slowly catching up to what the Bible has to say.
Yeah. That's not to say that there's not a lot of parts in there that are, at first glance disagreeable, and even maybe at second and third glance, when it talks about wiping out people and doing things, those are really tough verses to go through as a believer. I can't imagine how tough they are for somebody who looks at us and thinks we're all crazy.
Yeah. Well, I wrote in my notes 2 words: sanctioned pedophilia. And I didn't give myself any other context on that at all.
Yeah.
We'll just breeze past that.
Well, if it makes you comfortable, I'm going to come out strongly against that. So,
wow, okay.
Yeah.
Brave position.
Yeah, brave position, yeah.
I know this is countercultural, but I'm going to come out strongly against.
I have a guttural instinct against that, and that's where I think Jesus is pacifistic in nature, but not a pacifist. I did love that at the end of the chapter where he talks about George Miller and Hal Lindsey.
Oh yeah,
and there's a number of current Christians that he could have spoken about that he didn't, and I was curious why he went back into antiquity for those end of world beliefs, because I think, and this will probably get me in trouble with some people in your audience, but I think part of the problem that we're suffering from right now with some of the Christian nationalism and the other things that we're experiencing is this clinging too tightly to a pre-tribulation style eschatology, in that what that kind of does is it makes a segment of us think that we're insiders and we have to always be on the lookout. And when we see those things, we sound the alarm to everybody else so they can follow us.
Yeah.
And I think, with some of what we've seen, that's a problem. And I think, Jesus pretty clearly tells us that there's basically something that even he doesn't know. And that's when this is going to happen, when he's going to come back the second time. Yeah. And for all of us puny-minded little earthlings to run around thinking we can figure it out through some code in the Bible or, some other litmus test, and then we're going to be the ones that expose the world to it, I think that's false doctrine.
Yeah.
And I don't know what's going to happen in the end with that, but I don't want to be on the side of that.
Yeah. Everyone wants to be an insider. Everyone wants arcane knowledge, but I don't think any pre-trib people listen to this show. So, well, I couldn't find the passage I was talking about, but he has this like paragraph-long thing where he says "by all means" a bunch of times, and he says, "Well, by all means, circumcise a boy with your mouth, and by all means, keep people from taking vaccines, and by all means." But the second last one that he listed was, by all means, instruct your coworkers on creationism during your lunch break.
Oh, yeah, I do remember that.
How did talking about creationism get slipped into sanctioned pedophilia and physical abuse?
Yeah, that's
a straw man there.
Yeah, totally. That's where I think Hitchens is a bit of a snake oil salesman. I don't even think he believes some of what he's throwing out here right now. But I think he sees Christians as people who are literally carnival barkers selling a product that doesn't work. Mm-hmm. And I think in his own unique way, he equated all of these things that don't work, including creationism. Although, again, to go back, so how did life begin? And it's such a simple question. And if you just stick to that same, so tell me how it began. And so whether it's the lightning bolt into the cosmic soup that, creates the accidental single cell amoeba, okay, well, that essentially, not only does that mean that our relatives are monkeys and apes, but really what that means is our relatives are salamanders and heads of cabbage. Because that single cell amoebas had to continue to morph and become things, and just the chances of that, and the chances of a male something and a female something having parts that fit together, mm-hmm. is beyond our current mathematical probabilities and possibilities. It just it can't be. Yeah. And so I think that's where the whole atheistic argument falls apart. Is they cling to science. Science is generally a math-based philosophy, right? Mm-hmm. Plus this equals this, and so therefore this is going to be how we do it. And with their own tool, with their own math, I think we can demonstrate that it doesn't work. It's broken.
And he's basically, calling for all these things to be criminalized, and he slips creationism in there, but right. A bunch of behaviors that Christianity wouldn't condone by any means. I mean, I don't think there's anything in that chapter that Christianity would specifically condone, especially all the child abuse and stuff that he talked about. But it's kind of ironic that under a different time and place, the things that he's talking about in this book would be completely outlawed. If we started criminalizing ideas and criminalizing certain thoughts, just bizarre for him to take that, because he's generally a liberty-minded person, but he's come across as a pretty big neocon in this book so far, as what he has to say about the Middle East and stuff. Yeah. So,
well, I wonder what state he would cling to as a good model of flourishing.
Yeah,
I mean, I guess you could go back to Rome and Greece.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure those were good models for everybody. They were
Lots of
good models.
pedophilia in ancient Greece.
Right. Well, a ton
Yeah.
of pedophilia. And you also have a caste system, right? So most people that know what goes on in India, when they find out, they're appalled by it.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that makes America unique is we don't have a caste system. You know, there's no one here that I'm aware of that says you were born into poverty and so therefore you can't be rich.
Yeah.
You know, whether
except for critical race theorists.
Well, yeah, that's again, that's self-refuting theory. That's postmodernism at its worst. I mean, postmodernism is self-refuting. You know, these people that subscribe to these theories wholeheartedly and full-throatedly are going to run out of victims. And so I think that's what we're seeing now is they're starting to feed on themselves.
Yeah.
And so when you feed on yourself, I mean, should we be worried about those things as Christians? Yeah. Should we be against them? Yeah. Should we go out and violently protest? Absolutely not. God's in control. He knew this was coming. It's frustrating, and it's okay to be frustrated, but man, we're called to hold love in our hearts. And what if the way to reach somebody who's fully indoctrinated in critical race theory and postmodernism, what if the way to reach them is an upside down kingdom exposed to us by Jesus? And instead of doing that, we go out and we're on the front lines with a sign telling them that we hate you or we disagree with you or you're a jerk. Yeah. I think we've missed the mark.
Yeah. I got a little trivia for you since he mentioned Jim Jones and
yes,
Kool-Aid.
The Guyana tragedy.
Did you know that they did not use Kool-Aid?
I did not.
It was Flavor Aid.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So, you know, if I was committing mass suicide, I would definitely spend the extra money for the name brand. But
wow, he went generic Kool-Aid.
Can you imagine being Kool-Aid and actually having nothing to do with that event, but forever you are mischaracterized as the thing that killed all those people?
Wow.
Mary Magdalene was not a prostitute. From what we know, the Bible never mentions her being a prostitute, but that's how she's remembered throughout all of history. That's just so messed up.
Interesting.
So anyways, I don't know. Just a little piece of trivia there. He mentions Abraham and Isaac. He talks about Abraham being praised for being willing to kill his son.
Right.
And I think that's a big misunderstanding of the story for sure. But he's actually lauded for his faith. And the thing that I thought of when I read that is that, Abraham would be a crazy murderer with voices in his head, unless what the Bible says is true.
Right.
And that's the key difference. So the Bible is true. So the hypotheticals don't really matter. It doesn't really matter what would have happened if, God's plan failed, because God's plan was not going to fail,
Yeah. Well, and I think Abraham knew that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Hebrews even tells us that he believed that if he got that far, God would raise him from the dead, So,
right.
Very misunderstood story, for sure, which I think most things are.
I was going to say, aren't they all? I feel like so many of them are. And that doesn't mean I have complete understanding. It just means as I get into understanding, my mind is often blown by, wow, I've read this a dozen times and I never saw that.
Yeah. Yeah, every time I read through the Bible, I'm seeing, twice as much stuff as I saw before. It's just, it never ends. But do you remember when Isaac asked his father where the sacrifice was?
Yeah.
That's so great.
Yeah, don't worry about it. Yeah,
God's
don't
gonna
worry
provide
about
it.
God will provide.
Yeah, he already has in a lot of ways. You're right here. What do you think the walk home was like?
Right? Yeah. Yeah, Isaac was totally confused. So, Dad, help me. What happened? Yeah.
I didn't understand anything that was happening there. So then he mentions, the Bible's mistreatment of women, and I think that he's pretty far off base with that. You already mentioned going through Deuteronomy with your wife and how some things are a little, hard to understand on their surface, and but maybe there is a good reason for them. My friend Nick Quint has done a lot of work in this area, and he's an egalitarian. I'm not, but he's done a lot of the work in showing that the ways that the Bible favored women was actually really countercultural for the time and place they were in. And things like Chris Pobletti mentions a lot that women were the first people to be told about the resurrection, and women are listed as high-ranking members of the early churches and stuff, and that was just not culturally how women were treated.
Right. Yeah. So I subscribe to that theory as well, and that theory though basically says that God is easing his people into it in the capacity that he knew that they could understand and not totally rebel. Mm-hmm. And so like a modern day way of looking at that is if I told, my wife or my daughter, if we were going to go on a mission to the Middle East, and we were, pick your country, Iraq, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Jordan, and I said, you know what, I think we need to take a bold stand here for Jesus. Go ahead and wear that miniskirt, stand on the corner, and hold your Bible up and tell them they're all going to hell and they're wrong, and that, God is a Trinity, and see how it goes. And I think with 100% certainty, we could predict exactly how that would play out. Mm-hmm. But we could also go there and we could ease into society, and we could slowly discuss and debate in an earnest and winsome way, and slowly begin to win converts to our way of thinking in a way that would glorify God and not have somebody dead in a pool of blood with their limbs torn in 20 different directions.
Yeah. That was a gruesome image you just painted.
Thank you.
I liked it a lot. But he, on that note, he also says that Eve was just for Adam's use and comfort, and I don't think that's entirely inaccurate to say.
Hitchens says that, right?
He does say that.
Yeah, that's a total falsehood. I don't speak or read Hebrew, but occasionally you get a word study, and the whole term for Eve is Ezer Kenegdo. And as a Ezer Kenegdo, our Bibles typically translate that as helpmeet. And a helper is not a good enough way to translate that. Really what she is that Adam was incomplete and she completed him. Mm-hmm. And I hate to use another faith symbolism, but it's almost a yin and yang type of thing, where the two become one in ways that are unique to our species, and it allows for human flourishing. And so Eve is to come shoulder to shoulder with Adam. And there's the old, you've probably heard it before in your Sunday school, Eve did not come from Adam's head so that he could lord over her with his mind. Eve did not come from Adam's feet so that he could walk over her. Eve came from Adam's side so that they were co-equals and could overlook God's creation and basically be, his chief gardeners in creation.
Yeah. And that's exactly why, the way that he paints it is not accurate. I think probably just for what he leaves out, because it's not as if Eve wasn't useful or a comfort to him, but to say that she was like this item to be used by Adam is completely, whatever. But, I was actually going to say that the translation of helper still isn't really that bad, because that's a term God gives to himself. The Holy Spirit is our helper. He calls himself a helper when he's helping Israel in battle a lot. So, I I think we should be willing to take the same designation that God gives to himself. But
it's not a diminutive or demeaning description at all.
No.
And our English translations have done a good job of leading to that belief.
Yeah.
It's the whole... We have a tendency, we love to look at Thomas Jefferson with the Jeffersonian Bible and say, how dare you cut out God's, Jesus's miracles. We look at the slave traders who cut out Exodus and say, how dare you do that? But we don't have much compunction with people mistranslating important words and then living off those philosophies and theories for our whole lives. And I think we need to take that very, very seriously, and that's where the study of the Bible comes in. And I'm not sure that anywhere it said that we need to study it daily. I don't think that's a direction, but I think that's a good practice.
Yeah, definitely. And in reality, to give Adam this massive undertaking of taking dominion over creation, and then to basically find that he can't do it alone, and to say that this is the one I'll create to help you with this massive undertaking that you cannot do alone, and she's going to help you with it. I just don't see how people interpret that in a way that demeans women, but it obviously it happens. It's historically precedented.
Yeah. Well, if it's anything like my marriage to my wife, I probably would have been willing to try and go it alone. And then you would have gotten some really bizarrely named animals, and some I would have forgotten. So thank goodness I have an organized woman who comes along and gives me my list and helps me become better than I am.
He cast doubt on the idea that Jesus ever existed in reality, which is a pretty brave position to take, because all contemporary histories of that time maintain that he was a real person who was said to have risen from the dead. No one even really has an argument against him raising from the dead so much.
Yeah, well, that was the part that I've read so far that probably shocked me the most, that he made that claim. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's a lot of, so I'm old. There's a lot of stuff that goes into, like they used to call it the swoon theory. There's a lot of theories that Jesus was not actually resurrected from the dead. There's the swoon theory is that he passed out and swoon, and then he just woke up after a couple of days and like, hey, well, I'm in this cave. And while that's an incredible theory for people to offer, it's a theory. The one theory that I think we should be able to just throw out is the one where Jesus never existed.
Yeah.
That doesn't even seem credible or realistic to me. No. So that one kind of threw me for a loop at the end, and that actually made me want to maybe this is a literary device where it kind of made me wanted to see where he was going to go with that and expand on it, because that theory is so incredible as to have no value to me.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, plenty of people today saying that he never existed, but I mean, you're not going to find anyone from that time and place that would have denied. I mean, it would be akin to saying like, there was this fable about a guy named Donald Trump, and
right.
There's no real evidence he ever existed, but a lot of people talked about him and said he was going to do some great things. And
yeah, I think it's absolute silliness to say that he never existed. I think it's misguided, but not silly to ask what form he existed in. Mm-hmm. And so, they just found some more Dead Sea Scrolls.
Really?
Yeah.
No way.
Yeah, it was in the news yesterday or 2 days ago. They found a bunch of fragments, and it's books of the Old Testament, and they think it predates the Qumran, the Dead Sea Scrolls themselves. Wow. Yeah, so it's crazy. And so there's all these, the Old Testament, there's all these things that point forward. He's coming, he's coming, he's coming, he's coming, he's coming. And the New Testament, there's all these things that say he came, he came, he came, he came. And to discount so many disparate things that all come together and form that is mind-boggling to me.
Yeah. Well, I think people think it's like one book.
Right.
Like one book where someone wrote all this kind of corroborating stuff.
Yeah.
And then if you're using that same book to, validate or invalidate something else, then, you're just being internally inconsistent. But it's like, these are 40 authors over 3,000 years, like maybe longer. I think it might even be longer than that. And it's like, it's not one, that's a lot of history bound up in that one volume,
Yep. Yeah. It's amazingly intricate. That's why I loved Tim Mackey's hypertext thought process on the Bible, that it just links everywhere. It just glows. When you open it, it glows with hypertexts. Mm-hmm. And I think that's amazing. And I think that's something that, most people don't know. And again, why would people know this who've never read the Bible? Why would we expect them? If you've never opened it, you've never read it, and you don't follow the God we follow, why would I expect you to know any of those things? Yeah. And that's where I think neighborliness and charity come in.
Yeah, definitely. And the Spirit does reveal so much to us through our reading.
Sure.
That it's almost irrational. It's almost irrational to try to force people to understand things that we, for the most part, believe they can't understand without certain help that comes from being regenerate and being counted among God's family. So
yes. Now I know you're a cessationist, so I'll take that definition slightly out of tune or out of key here, but can the Holy Spirit use your wife to bring things?
Yeah, absolutely. I think people misunderstood that I was like trying to say that God would not be like, I don't know. I think there's not a new word from God is the main point of cessationism. Sure. There's no new scripture. There's, God doesn't have a word for you from this particular person. But, I even said in the episode that the Holy Spirit impresses things on people's hearts, and we're led by God's providence in all sorts of directions and into all sorts of conversations and stuff. So, I mean, he's definitely at work in a providential way all over the place, but I don't believe in tongues or prophecy or anything like that happening today.
Sure.
Yeah. One last thing I wanted to mention, he gives us a glimpse into his own soul here in a very, very subtle statement that I noticed. He was talking about heaven, and he says that Christianity has failed to invent a tempting heaven. And this actually proves kind of what we were just talking about, that, heaven, as the Bible presents it, where we worship God for eternity, wouldn't really be all that tempting to an unbeliever at all, because, unbelievers don't seek God and revile what is good, and, they call good evil and evil good and all that stuff. So it's for just 2 words, the words tempting heaven, he actually told us everything that we need to know about the state of his soul at the time of this writing.
Sure. Well, it told me he misses the whole point of Christianity too.
Yeah.
So he came at it from a Westerner, and so he came at it from Christianity is all about where I'm going and what's going to happen to me. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that's the point of Christianity. Christianity is not about you and me going to heaven. Christianity is about Jesus bringing heaven back down to earth. Mm-hmm. And so we're waiting for that time, and we're heading towards that. And so our goal down here as Christians, and we fail all the time, and we've had this discussion before, is to emulate Jesus, to introduce other people to him. And since Jesus isn't walking the earth, a little bit in your cessationist vein, we're the embodiment of that to the best of our abilities. And we're supposed to make them excited for the hope that lives in us. Mm-hmm. And so when earth and heaven reunite again, as we all know they were united at one point, way back in the beginning, then we will have what we're searching for.
Yeah. Man, well, any concluding thoughts? We've been going almost 2 hours. This is now the longest episode in Death of Death history.
Sorry.
No, that's all.
That's my fault.
If it wasn't good, it would have been ended a little earlier than this.
Well, I did notice you hit stop. You stopped recording about an hour and a half ago. So
yeah, I got all I needed out of the first. Once we talked about Man Bear Pig, it was pretty much all good.
So yeah, no, I just appreciate it. Was just nice talking to you. If there's anything usable in here, that's a bonus. It was nice talking to you and seeing you. I hope you and Ashley are well.
Yeah. Oh, she says hi, by the way. I talked to her on the phone seconds before I dialed you up. So
sweet.
Yeah.
Well, tell her Linda and I say hello back. We miss you guys. We're happy for you, but we do miss you.
Yeah.
And no, thanks for the honor of being a part of your show.
Yeah. Well, thanks for being on the show, man. I need to have you back soon, because when I was preparing for this episode, I realized there's so many things that we could be talking about. from your life story to all the ministries that you and Linda are involved in. Linda also has just so much value to bring to any conversation that one would be lucky enough to have with her. So we definitely need to have you back on to talk about stuff.
Well, Linda would be a fantastic guest. I know that you're desperate for material when you have to turn towards me. So
you haven't been listening to the show lately, have you?
I just hope the show survives beyond this episode. That's all I'll say.
Oh, come on. Trevor said the same thing, and he's still one of the highest downloaded episodes of all time.
Well, Trevor's actually smart, and he has a sadly compelling story.
Come on. Did you just try to say that you're not smart?
No.
That would be dishonest of you.
Yeah. No. I honestly, I enjoy the intellectual rigor.
Yeah.
You know, like I said, I didn't really prepare for this. We were just sort of talking, and it was fun.
Well, yeah, that was amazing that you didn't prepare for this outside of just reading. So we've got good chemistry, you and I.
Yes.
Brian.
Yeah. Well.
Well, this Tuesday I'm doing another episode on statism, so maybe if that stokes any ideas in your head, we could have you on to talk about that kind of stuff, or just literally anything you would like to talk about. I will have any conversation with you that you want. It's a free pass here, so we'll get you on soon.
I'm free all the time, so anytime you want to chat, let me know.